Well, here I am back in the Azure portal again. And this time I'm going to look at my resources and I can see that I've got a resource called DAT228X ADLS, and it's a data lake store resource. So let's take a look at that. Now, Data Lake Store is similar in many ways to Azure Storage in that it's a place in my Azure subscription that I can use as a cloud store for all sorts of different data files. The real difference is that Azure Data Lake Store is optimized for large numbers of very large files. So in other words, it's great for big data solutions. It doesn't have any limits on the number of files or the size of those individual files. And there are a number of other advantages to it as well, but that's really the main thing. It's really a big data solution. And I can see here I've got this data lake store set up. I've enabled encryption as I set it up, so I've got a level of security. The data is encrypted as it's stored in there. I can do things like configure a firewall to prevent access to it. So there's a number of different options for securing the data there. And I've also got this ability to use the Data Explorer, which is a tool built into the Azure portal. So if I click Data Explorer, I get this kind of two-pane tool appearing here. I've got a pane here on the left, which is sort of the Explorer pane, and then the details are over here on the right. And I can see that currently in my Data Lake store, I don't have any items there. So I could create a new folder here. So we'll go ahead and create a new folder, and we'll just call that Data. And off that goes and creates that folder. So now I start to see the hierarchy appearing over here, and I've got my data folder here. And I could look at the properties of that folder. If I go into that folder, I can look at its properties here, and I can get the path that's used to connect to that folder and so on. And I can also do things like at the individual folder level, I could set different access permissions. So I could come into here and I could get a list of the users. If I've configured this with Azure Active Directory, I can configure the permissions that can be granted for people to access that folder. So I get a kind of granular security capability here. And then within that data folder, I can go ahead and I could upload some files. So I could go and select some files from my local file system. I'll just go to this data folder and select all the files that are in there. And it allows me, it lists them up here. It allows me to overwrite them if they already exist. And I'll go ahead and add them. And I get the status appearing as it goes and uploads those files to my folder. And then if I go back into the folder itself, and we'll just refresh that view, there are those files there listed for me. And again, I can, well, I haven't got any subfolder, so I can't expand into that, but I could select the data folder there and again see the files here. So I'm able to navigate and manage the files in my Azure Data Lake Store using this Data Explorer tool within the Azure portal itself. Now, if I'm actually working within something like Visual Studio, if I'm developing applications using Visual Studio that work with Data Lake, then I can, again, just expand into this Cloud Explorer, look at my Data Lake store. Here it is here. And if I right-click that, I can either open it in the portal like I did before, or open File Explorer here. And that gives me a similar kind of pane here. I can see there's my storage, there's my data folder, there are the files within my data folder. So I can manage them from within the Visual Studio environment as well. And there are other tools that I could use. There's the Azure command line interface has support for working with Azure Data Lake Store using command line arguments, and I could use PowerShell. So there are various ways that I could connect to the Data Lake Store and use it. But when I'm building a big data solution, then typically I'm going to want to have at least some tool that's able to connect and work with the files and folders where I want to store my big data for processing.